Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's 8 o'clock here in San Francisco, and I'm trying to do the time zone math. It's what, 5 p.m. there in Italy, 17. So I guess we are now to good evening. Was asked by the team at Artur to share with you some of the sort of more practical things around effective communication in the US, particularly to offer sort of how we sort of coach and mentor and help startups and companies that want to be able to do business in the US. And so I want to talk about two topics. And I'm going to be using some of the training materials that we use, but I'm not going to be going over every slide. So if you just see me skipping past a slide, it's not relevant to this particular conversation. But what I would like to do is, as much as possible, be interactive. Okay, so let's get started. So the first topic I want to spend a little bit of time on is the big mistake, one of the really big mistakes that we see non-US companies make when they are trying to effectively communicate in the US is that they spend too much time talking about the wrong things. And this isn't necessarily what we were just joking about in terms of taking too long to say hello. It is really that the focus of the conversation is the wrong place, because a lot of different things go into being a successful entrepreneur, and we're not going to talk about that. But the really core where it all begins is that most companies make the mistake that they think that someone is going to buy, or that someone cares about the features of their product. That it has this, it goes at 5,000 RPM, it does something else. And the reality is that people buy products or services because they create value. It doesn't matter, if you have a drone and you're using the drone to inspect electrical wires, do you really care how fast the rotors of the drone spin? Do you really care if there are 4 rotors or 5 rotors, if there are 6 blades or 9 blades? You really don't. What you care about is the ability to effectively and efficiently be able to look at the wires. And the thing that we see with a lot of companies from around the world is that they obsess over, look at all the cool things that my product does, as opposed to look at how my product can create value for you. And this is an absolutely enormous problem, because why do companies fail? Why do market entry efforts fail? Right? They fail because you don't have any customers, not because the product doesn't work. The odds of pure product failure these days is really, really low. Those of us in the tech industry, if I go back 25 years, 30 years ago, wow, we were trying to do stuff, and the stuff we were trying to do, we didn't know if we could actually make the technology do it. The number of industries in which you are at the point of, we really don't know if the technology is going to work, is probably like quantum computing, space travel, like you look at like SpaceX trying to get to Mars. But for your average product or service, the machine works, the software works, the device works. The question is your product or service creating value? And it's so important. And I cannot tell you the number of times I hear a company start to talk and they say, we produce a drone that blah, 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 blah. That's nice. What I want to hear people say is things like, we can save you $500,000 a month. Okay, now you have my attention. That in the US, the focus begins and ends in the early stages of the conversation around value creation. Because if you don't have any customers, this is you, right? This is also me. I'm a serial entrepreneur. To do a quick introduction of myself, I had 9 companies, 3 exits, 3 companies that I just completely destroyed. But the things that I learned, particularly around the importance of value in those companies, let me sell my last big endeavor in 2009 for $1.2 billion. And it's all about how do you create value? Because if you're product centric, you're asking the wrong kinds of questions of yourself. What does it do? What are the features? What is my technology? What are the specs? How much are people going to pay? And in order to be successful in the US, you need to turn hard away from this, right? Because in effect, when you're talking about your product or service, you're talking about your baby. And I joke about this in my classes, but it's 100% true. We view our product, our service, our company as our child. And, of course, our child is the best ever, right? It's got all kinds of awards, baby of the year, looks just like me. And what's interesting is I've talked about this idea of our product or service being a baby. And I've talked about it for years. And actually, a friend of mine sent this to me, that some people in Finland, who I guess had more EU money than, they knew what to do with, actually put some entrepreneurs in a functional MRI machine. A functional MRI is that big like donut machine that you can actually see in real time what's happening in somebody's brain. And they literally showed founders, startup founders, pictures of their own children, like your flesh and blood child. That's my daughter. And then showed people a picture of like their product, like the machine that they built. And literally the brain lit up in the same way. Our brain literally processes our company as if it were our baby. And honestly, most parents, particularly newborn parents, are the most obnoxious people in the world. And I know I was one. It's like, here's a picture of my baby, right? But who are these people? This is everybody that's tired of looking at all of your pictures of your baby, right? They want to know not that you have a baby, not that you have a product or a service, but they want to know what you're going to do with it. So one of the things that you can do with your companies is you can help them shift their thinking, right? From being this idea of product centric, look, it's a drone and it has a camera, to what are the things that are going to enable your customers to solve their problems? Not what does my product do, but how does it help my customer? And I need to drop out of my screen share for a minute and come back in because I forgot to click on the right button. And I want to play a clip from Steve Jobs that really drives home this point. So, a lot of people are like, when I give this talk, a lot of startups are like, well, Steve Jobs didn't ask people, what they wanted. He said, if you ask them what they want, they're never going to tell you the right thing, which is a misunderstanding of what he was trying to do. And the reality is they actually talk to customers all the time. I was actually in the Apple store in Palo Alto one time and Steve was there. And I was looking at a laptop for my daughter. And I hear a voice behind me, can I help you? And I turn around and there's Steve standing in the Apple store selling laptops. Why? Because he wanted to hear directly from the customers. He wanted to know what my daughter, not like how many RAM did she want or how big a screen. He wanted to know, what is she going to use it for? What is she trying to get done? So listen to Steve.
And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that. And I think that's the right path to take. I remember with the laser writer, we built the world's first small laser printers, you know, and there was awesome technology in that box. We had the first Canon laser printing, cheap laser printing engine in the world, in the United States here at Apple. We had a very wonderful printer controller that we designed. We had Adobe's PostScript software in there. We had AppleTalk in there. Just awesome technology in the box. And I remember seeing the first printout come out of it, and just picking it up and looking at it and thinking, you know, we can sell this. Because you don't have to know anything about what's in that box. All we have to do is hold this up and go, do you want this? And if you can remember back to 1984, before laser printers, it was pretty startling to see that. People went, whoa, yes.
And that's the mistake that we see people make, is they start with the technology and then try to figure out the customer side. So we want your companies that you're working with to really understand that we want, in the US, not to know what your product does, but how does it create value? Because the customer needs to be at the center of all of your thinking, because you end up asking different questions. It's not what does my product do, but you're constantly asking questions of who are they? When do they buy? How do they buy? What problems do they have? What do they value? How much are they willing to pay to solve the problem? It's to get inside the head of the customer. And the first step in terms of doing this from our perspective is to be able to create an effective value proposition, because most value propositions are actually pretty terrible. It's, we built this big platform that's letting you go to Industry 4.0 with a team of PhDs, blah, 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 right? And the framework that we use for being able to communicate value to our customers is in 4 not so easy steps. And this was developed by Kirk Carlson at the Stanford Research Institute. It's known as SRI within the industry. And it's to look at, how can you describe the need? What's the problem you're solving, and for whom? How are you solving the problem? What is the value you're going to create? And why are you better than the other choices that they have? So let's take a quick look at each of these. You can think about value in terms of, if you look at the need side, what is the pain that your customers want to have go away, or what is the good thing that they want more of? You can often describe the value creation, the need side, as either a pain or a gain. You can say, I wish, you know, that I had fewer rejects coming off of my production line. Or you could say, I wish my production line didn't make so many rejects. I'm less concerned if you describe it as a pain or a gain. But what I'm trying to understand is, what is the outcome? How is it that they want something to be different? Or you can also think of it in terms of, what is the job your product is being hired to do, right? And all of this always exists in the context of a customer. Problems don't float around in the universe just by themselves. So in the case of Uber, I think all of you are familiar with Uber, even though I don't think Uber works in Italy these days. An example, if I were to use Uber, the problem that Uber is trying to solve is that people want to go from point A to point B at any time of day, in any weather, without needing cash. It's a very clear summation of the problem that they're trying to solve. There's another company called Bolt Bolt is out of Estonia. And Estonia started, their original branding was called Taxify, and they were an app for taxi drivers. And they ended up creating something that looks almost exactly like Uber. And I know there are a couple of companies in Italy, taxi companies, that now have an app. You can order the taxi on the app in Italy. But Uber is trying to help people get from point A to point B. Bolt was trying to help drivers of taxis make more money by finding more rides. Notice there's a non-trivial distinction here. Uber is trying to help riders. Bolt is trying to help drivers. Both of them need drivers. Both of them need riders. But they're actually trying to solve different problems, even though the technical approach looks the same. And it has very real implications. Uber, for instance, if the wait time is too long for people to get a ride, they will offer incentives to the drivers in order to get more drivers on the road so people don't have to wait as long. Bolt, on the other hand, limits the number of drivers on the road so that the driver is always busy. Bolt will also raise their prices during a period of high demand, but all they're doing is passing that on to the driver, not to get the driver on the road, but to fulfill their mission of helping drivers make more money. So the very question that the problem that you're trying to solve actually determines a whole set of outcomes. If you think about the approach, what we want to know is not a detailed feature function list. We want to know, what was the insight that you had? What was the aha moment that you had that allowed that allowed you to say, wow, if we only did this, everything would be better. For Uber, is build an app that uses a GPS to connect the drivers and riders without a need to talk on the phone and use a credit card to pay, right? Uber didn't invent the smartphone. They didn't invent the smartphone app. They didn't invent the GPS. They didn't invent credit card payment. No, what they did is they had an insight that said, if we brought all of these different things together, we would be able to do something special. Benefits. What are the good things that are going to happen? You need to quantify them. They must be justified in terms of cost. So again, using Uber as an example, Uber's benefit is people can get to where they want to go, waiting approximately 7 minutes at a cost no more than 15% more than a taxi. They're not trying to compete with taxis on price. They're trying to compete with taxis on benefit. Who's chasing the same budget? Why are you better than the other alternatives? It's simple. You have the people who are trying to do it the same way, people who are trying to solve the same problem in a different way, and inertia. If you're trying to sell your product or service in the US, you need to be able to effectively communicate all of these aspects of value creation: need, approach, benefit, and why they should pick you as opposed to somebody else. What do you do better? An admission of sometimes they do something better than you, but in a quantified way. How do you do stuff that's faster? One of Uber's competitors is a car, right? One of the ways you can get from point A to point B at any time of day, and you don't need to have cash in your pocket, is your own car, right? But ultimately, the goal of the person is they need to get places, right? And the car or a bicycle or a motorcycle or a scooter or a skateboard are all competitors. Uber's competitors are cars, motorcycles, buses, subways, skateboards, rollerblades, your own 2 feet, right? Because why do you own a car? Unless you have a Ferrari that's sitting there and that you're trying to show off, it's like, look at me, I'm successful. If you just have a little Fiat Panda, why do you have a Fiat Panda? You have a Fiat Panda because you're trying to get places. So Uber's competitors are all the people, all of the ways that the problem can be solved. And if Uber is cheaper than owning a car and more convenient than owning a car, like I'm now living part-time in Tbilisi, Georgia, in the country, Georgia, and parking in the capital is just an absolute nightmare. I wouldn't want a car, not because I don't like a car and I don't like to drive or it's too expensive. It's just whenever I'm going somewhere, I could never find a place to park. So I use an app because it facilitates me getting where I need to be. And so, Luca, as you said, one of the great benefits is you don't need a car, but it's I don't need a car in order to get where I go. Right?
Yes, you do not need the car because you have a cheaper solution. Even the car in many cities are more expensive to park than to run.
Yeah.
So it happens that maybe you have a value proposition, but the real thing that made the customer buy your product is because of another value that you do not figure out beforehand. Like, for instance, Uber, you have like a defined price, so it's the price beforehand. If you jump in a taxi, you will never know how much you're going to spend.
Correct. And that's part of why it's better than the competition, right?
True.
Right. But the point is that so many people, when they try to come to the US, are all focused on, that it would be like, well, we have 10,000 cars on the road. It's like, so what? If you have 10,000 cars on the road and each ride costs 500 euros, who cares, right? It is what you're describing, Luca, is different forms of value creation. And this is essentially what drives customer segmentation. Different customer segments care about different things, right? So, what they're going to use as their decision making of why do I choose choice A or choice B is going to be different, right? But my point is that what you need to be focused on is who's your customer and how do you create value for them. And part of that is what's the problem you're solving. There are people for whom, like for me in Georgia, the reason I take Bolt is not because it's cheaper, not because or anything. The reason I take it is that I can never find a place to park, right? So the problem that it's solving for me is can't find a place to park. And I'm not doing the math of, is it cheaper to use Bolt or cheaper to have a car? If I can't find a place to park, it doesn't matter. And this is about deeply understanding your customer and what does your customer care about and how does your customer make decisions, not what does your product do. You need to explain to the research center in San Francisco or Berkeley or wherever, what if they work with you, what is the value that they will get from that, right? It doesn't matter that you have 80 members, that's nice. But why would they work with you? What is it that the collaboration is going to do for them? What is the value that it's going to create? Right? So, for instance, there is a group at Berkeley, in addition to the work I do at USMAC, I also teach at Berkeley. And there's a group at Berkeley that is called Cyclotron Road, which is at the Berkeley National Laboratory. And it's called Cyclotron Road because the address of the laboratory is 1 Cyclotron Road. And they collaborate with researchers from all over the world. The value that they offer is if you join with Cyclotron Road, you can come for 2 years to Berkeley, fully funded. Your researchers, you just pay their salary. They take care of everything else. They take care of the housing, the airfare, all of that stuff. And you have the full rights and privileges of being a researcher at the Berkeley National Lab, so that you can collaborate with people, use the equipment, access the research, participate in the conversations, so that you can have access to one of the biggest, best labs in the world. That's the value that they offer, right? So the question would be, if somebody's going to collaborate with you, why? 80 companies is not the answer. You know, even with Cyclotron Road, they talk about they have 3,500 researchers, but we have 3,500 researchers across 120 disciplines, right? Including 5 Nobel laureates. Okay, so part of the value is you can collaborate with a world-class team. It's not just we have 3,500 researchers, we have 3,500 of the best researchers in the world that you can work with. So I want to get a little bit more practical, and I'm gonna share with you some of the stuff again that we share with the startups that we work with, but that is around sort of how do you pitch ideas? How do you pitch ideas and services? And the thing that, you know, entrepreneurs and anybody actually in business does thousands of different pitches, right? There's a sort of what we would call a 20-second pitch. Some people call it an elevator pitch, but it's just that really quick, you know, who I am, like you're at a cocktail party and somebody says, "Hey, Chris, what are you doing?" You got that little quick blurb. There's typically a 4-minute investor or customer pitch, and then typically a 20-minute investor or customer pitch. And the reality is, these kinds of presentations, these pitches, are almost universally bad. And I don't mean bad, I mean they are like aggressively bad. The people are like robots. It's like somebody asks, "Well, what do you do?" And then it's all of a sudden it's like, "I'm Chris Burry from US Market Access Center. We blah, 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 blah," right? They don't tell you really anything. If they're using PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever, the slides are a mess. And I want to play a clip again. I love this video. There's a TV show that's called Silicon Valley, and it is a parody of Silicon Valley. And one of the things that happens in Silicon Valley all the time is startups are pitching. And this is, you can see on the screen, it says TechCrunch Disrupt SF. There is an actual huge tech event every year in San Francisco in non-COVID times. It's called TechCrunch Disrupt, and there's a pitch competition. And on the TV show, Silicon Valley, they made fun of TechCrunch Disrupt. Now, the best part of this is this was actually filmed at TechCrunch Disrupt with the real TechCrunch Disrupt audience, but it's making fun of TechCrunch Disrupt. But this is far too common, how people come across when they're trying to present their product, their service, their company. Take a listen.
People, are you ready? Are you ready for the ultimate tech startup competition? Let me hear it. Disrupt!
Hello, my name is Saeed Jabrani. I'm the CEO of Ametabug, and we're here to revolutionize the way you report bugs on your mobile platform.
Happen will revolutionize location-based mobile news aggregation as you know it. We're making the world a better place through Paxos algorithms for consensus protocols.
And we're making the world a better place through software-defined data centers for cloud computing.
A better place through canonical data models to communicate between endpoints.
A better place through scalable, fault-tolerant distributed databases with ACID transactions.
And we are truly local, mobile, social.
And we're completely so-mo-low.
And we're molo-so. We're low-mo-so, bro.
We were so-low-mo, but now we're mo-low-so. No, mo-so-low. No.
For me, that never gets old. It's really painful to watch, because it's really true. And this is not just true in the context of the tech industry. It's true in the context of most presentations that most people give. Most presentations are really bad. As I mentioned before, you know, one of the great things that I have the privilege of doing is working at Berkeley with some really, really smart people. And we've studied a lot about how do you actually effectively communicate, even down to looking at the brain science of communication, the neuroscience of communication. And the single thing that surprises me, honestly, about the people that we work with from Italy is that the single most effective way, the single most efficient way to communicate is by telling stories, right? The most powerful, Steve Jobs, the most powerful person in the room is the storyteller. And Italians are great at telling stories. But the issue is they tell stories, but as we were talking, I don't know, whatever, 30, 40 minutes ago, sometimes the introductions, the stories go on too long, right? But great presentations tell a story. It's the most effective way to communicate, not just to have ideas, but to have the ideas remembered. And it's because our brains are wired to remember stories. You can go to any culture anywhere in the world, including these, you know, the tribes in Indonesia that have, you know, that haven't really moved on into the modern era for the last 1,000 years. They're still doing stuff the way they've done over the last 1,000 years. Doesn't matter where you go. There's always storytelling. And part of the reason why is because our brains are pre-wired to remember stories. It's why if you go back 10,000 years, the people would be sitting around the campfire and the older people would be telling stories. Why? Because it was the most efficient way to get the young people to remember the lessons that they needed to be told. And it's the way that we speak actually matters. There's different kinds of ways that you can talk. It's object naming, visual naming, auditory naming. I'm not going to go into the whole neuroscience, right? But when we hear stories, something really magical happens. Your brain lights up in different ways. So if I were to describe riding a bike, if I just were to say, I rode a bike, nothing really goes on in your brain. But if I were to describe last weekend, I had this glorious bike ride through the wine country in Georgia. It was just these gentle rolling hills. And as I walked by, I could smell the grape leaves and I could look around and I could see the harvest going on. And I stopped at the side of the road and one of the farmers gave me a fistful of grapes to be able to try his grapes. And they were juicy and just the right amount of sugar. Just my act of describing that. Actually, most of you would have had saliva forming in your mouth because your brain is making connections to past experiences that you've had, and it's remembering it because your brain is lighting up in different ways, right? And it's the activation of these different brain regions that actually allows us to create a connection with the person that we're speaking to. We've had common experience, we've had shared experience, and your brain is associating the current conversation with past experience. And it's why storytelling as part of presenting is such an amazingly important part. of how you create these great presentations. You also, as you're presenting, you need to understand your audience. Gail talked about this in the last session, right? Is the person linear active? Are they multi-active? What's their cultural background? Are they more technical? Are they more business? You're going to communicate with an engineer differently than you're going to communicate with a marketing person. What's their job history? If they're an investor, what have they invested in? Because you need to be able to create the stories in a language that they relate to, in a style of speaking that they relate to, in order to get their brain to light up in such a way that they remember. The other thing that we see happen so often is that people lose sight of what is the objective of your presentation? What are you trying to accomplish? If you look back at the very beginning of this presentation, one of the things I did is I stopped and I asked each of you, what are you hoping to get out of this presentation, right? I wanted to know your objective so that I could bind what I'm speaking about to hopefully create value for you. Because you're the ones who get to decide whether or not my presentation is valuable. I think it's the best presentation ever. So what? The only people who get to decide whether this was a valuable presentation is whether or not I achieved your objective. So my objective needs to be to achieve your objective. And what we see happen is that many times people are like, they try to do too much in a presentation, as opposed to being really focused on let's get one point across. So what is the outcome you want in any presentation? Honestly, if I go back to this idea of the elevator pitch, the 20 seconds, we call it a wow statement. The goal of the wow statement is just to get the listener to know more, to want to know more. They go, wow, can you tell me more? If in that 20 seconds, you got them to say, wow, tell me more, you actually did what you needed to do in that presentation. In a 4 to 5 minute pitch, again, what you're really trying to do is to get the person to decide, do they want to spend more time to really deeply understand what you're doing? So what is the outcome that you're trying to get? And if you look at elements of storytelling, I'm not going to go through the whole sort of how do you tell a story. This is the hero's journey, the setup, the struggle. The young farm boy is in love with the beautiful girl. He leaves to go and becomes the dread pirate Roberts. Oh wait, I'm telling the story of the Princess Bride, right? There are these patterns of storytelling that have momentum and so forth. But what we want people to learn how to do is to stop being a fact teller and become a storyteller that includes facts. It's not to say that you cannot include, that you don't ever include facts, right? But I want you to, again, listen to Steve Jobs. He's one of the best presenters probably of the last 50 years. Listen to how he talks. Listen to the way in which he speaks to the audience, because he's not actually talking at the audience. He's having a conversation with an audience.
And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is. No. Actually, here it is, but we're going to...
So if you listen to this, Steve is having a conversation with the audience. He's not talking at them, he's talking with them, right? He's slow. He's not rushing. He's not trying to dump millions of facts on your head. He's not telling you about how much storage is in the phone and how big is the screen and all of these kinds of things. He's trying to create an emotional connection with the audience around the product, right? And he's got great passion and enthusiasm. He's got great pacing, body language. He's having fun. He's sharing, right? And part of what he's doing is built around what we call the science of attention, because our brains are really hardwired to be able to sort of process information in certain ways. And you got to understand how the brain works if you want to do this. The first thing you've got to accept is that you have to earn the listener's attention. No matter what's going on, you have got to get them to pay attention to you, and you have to earn it, right? In the first 20 to 30 seconds, the listener is asking themselves the question, do I care about what this person is talking about at all? And you can talk past the first 20 or 30 seconds, but if you've not gotten them to the point where they're sort of like, yeah, I care, they may be listening to you and they may be thinking about, you know, it's now what, 6 o'clock for you all. It could be, what's for dinner? You know, what wine am I going to have with dinner? Where am I going to go this weekend? When is the football match on? They could be paying attention by going, yes, and they're nodding their head and all of that, right? They're not paying any attention at all. In the next 2 to 4 minutes, they're going to look for the next layer of detail, and they're going to decide if they're going to give you more time. And then over the next 15 minutes, they're going to determine whether or not, you know, what you're talking about matters to them at all. So if you go back to actually how this whole presentation was structured, In the first 20 to 30 seconds of the presentation, I started out by asking what you wanted. And not only does that help me be able to grab the attention of you, it helps me focus my presentation, but it got you engaged in the whole conversation. You shared with me what you wanted. And so you had the expectation that after you shared what you wanted, that I was going to do that. And then I had to take the next few minutes to frame up what we were going to talk about, to be able to share what we were doing, why we were doing, and asking for your attention for the next 15 minutes. And what did I do at the end of the 15 minutes? Does anybody want to guess what I did at the end of the 15 minutes?
The first video or the questions? I don't remember.
It was the first questions, right? It was,
okay.
Right? It was, do you guys have any questions? And so I did two things. One is I acknowledged that there was a break point, right? I've sort of chewed up your attention span. So I got to take a break, and I'm going to ask you, do you have any questions? And you asked questions, and hopefully I answered the questions. And then I returned to the presentation, having earned the right to continue talking. Well, at least I hope I earned the right to continue talking. And what you'll notice through my presentation is every once in a while, I interject things like the video. And the point of the videos is not just to communicate with you all, but the point of the videos is to reset your attention span. And what we see happen with so many people that give presentations in the US is it's like, I have a 90-minute speaking slot. So I am going to just continue speaking and speaking and speaking and giving you more facts and more facts and more facts until I have consumed my, my 60 minutes or my 90 minutes. And that never works. People tune out. People don't continue to pay attention. So you've got to pay attention to these patterns. And this is not stuff that we have come up with. It's well known in terms of the public speaking community. And it's really interesting because most people start their presentations, they start their pitches, honestly, in a really very bad way. It's like, hi, I'm Chris Burry, and then I'm going to give you my bio, right? This is actually a video from TechCrunch Disrupt in New York, but this is an actual person pitching. And I want you to listen to how he starts his pitch, how he starts his presentation.
Do you remember how you first experienced the internet? Hello, I'm Bobby. It's amazing how the internet has evolved, and I founded Verb to continue this evolution by reinventing surfing the web. That's right, surfing the web. It's a throwback to the early 90s when surfing embodied this new and magical experience of flowing blue link to blue link. But this magic, this connectedness was short-lived.
Who is his audience? Who is he actually presenting to?
Possibly investors.
There are 5 investors, and the 5 investors are going to decide whether or not he gets $100,000. There are thousands of people watching him, but he has an audience of 5. How old is his audience of 5?
Would say old enough to recognize the sound of the modem.
Old enough to recognize the sound of the modem. Go back to what I talked about before about sensory experiences creating connection, right? Every single person who ever used dial-up remembers that sound. And they will take them back to, yeah, I remember when I first was able to get online. It was so cool. And yeah, it's not so cool anymore. Where's he going with this? So in the first 30 seconds, he created an emotional connection with the judges. Now, out of the 2,000 people in the audience, probably 3/4 of them have no idea what that noise was. He doesn't care if they know what the noise was or not. He cares that his audience of 5 knows what the noise is. Really great presenters find a way to create these emotional connections within the first 30 seconds. And giving your CV doesn't do that. You need to find a way, whenever possible, to be able to share that emotional connection. Right? The next piece of time, the 2 to 4 minutes, this is also hardwired in our brain. If you look at kids' books, it doesn't matter. You can go anywhere in the world and you can look at kids' books. And they all take between 3 and 4 minutes to read aloud. Doesn't matter if it's in Italian or English or French or Japanese or Korean or Chinese. It's all 3 to 4 minutes. Because our initial attention span as our brain develops is 4 minutes. And just because we get older and just because our brain evolves from that point, that 3 to 4 minute attention span still lives. So we can pretend it doesn't matter, but it does. And then this idea that you have roughly 15 to 20 minutes afterwards, the guidelines for TED Talks are, it really shouldn't be more than 18 minutes. Now, I've seen some TED Talks that are as long as 24 minutes. But, you know, there is somewhere in this 20-minute range another break point that if you go on past 30 minutes, you tend to lose the audience, which is why TED tries really hard to keep you in this very narrow band.
Chris, sorry, are you saying 30 minutes? I haven't got it.
So it's additive, right? The additive is that the additive is you've got 30 seconds plus 4 minutes. So you're at 4 minutes and 30 seconds plus 15 minutes, which gets you to 20-ish minutes. And that 15 is somewhere in the 15 to, it's actually 15 to 20 minutes. The TED people think it's more 15. There's some research that says that it's longer, but it's clearly the aggregate is not longer than 30 minutes.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
And so you want to structure and process this stuff in a way that you are doing a reset, right? And if you watch like television, the television commercials come roughly every 20 minutes. And there's a reason they come roughly every 20 minutes. And it's not just because the advertisers love to make money or love to advertise and the TV stations love it. It typically builds to a natural break point. And then you've got the ad. And then typically when they come back, there was either some suspense that was left. It's like the person is in a dangerous situation or whatever, but you come back from the TV commercial and there's something to immediately grab your attention again, to pull you back in away from the commercial. I'm sorry, I've just ruined every TV show you're ever going to watch. But when you watch this, you can also watch it in terms of movies, that you can actually see roughly every 20 minutes, it's almost like another chapter of the movie starts, and that there's something that happens again that is designed to pull your attention back in and earn the right for you to pay attention for the next 20 minutes or so. Is this making sense?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And the thing that we see is really problematic out of most countries is they don't pay any attention to this. They don't tell a story. It's just, let me tell you a whole bunch of facts. Fact, 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 fact. Take a breath. Fact, 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 fact. Sometimes I wonder how they actually even take a breath. So the last thing I want to talk about is that part of the reason we think so many of these presentations are bad is that people start by finding some template, like, oh, this is a template for a sales presentation, or a template for an investor pitch, or a template for whatever. And then they start making slides. They put a bunch of facts on the slides, and then they try to figure out, how do I explain the slides? And it's our belief that the right way of doing this is to look at what is the objective? What am I trying to accomplish? Who is my audience? Figuring out the story that I need to tell. How do I create the script for the story? And only then do you create the slides that support the story. And we teach people to really sort of storyboard. Like if you're doing an investment pitch, the investor wants to know the following 7 things. A customer might want to know something else. A potential employee might want to know something else. But most often they're not interested in how great your technology is or how smart you are. I mean, the Germans make me crazy with this. They want to tell me about where they went to school and they got a PhD and what was their thesis topic for their PhD and who was their thesis advisor and on what publications was their thesis published, and no one cares, right? You want to be able to create something that is a conversation with the audience. And I'm not going to go through the whole way that we create pitches, but you really want to use a technique that comes out of actually writing novels and screenplays and movies and stuff, which is to build a storyboard. You know, what are the chapters of the story that I'm telling? What are the things I need to explain in each of the chapters? And then what's the order in which I'm going to tell the story? So you map out the story you're going to tell before you've done anything else. But I hope that I was able to communicate and get across this idea that, particularly in the US, you've got to tell a story. You've got to be the storyteller, not the fact teller. If you want to be able to do that initial 30 seconds, get their attention, 4 more minutes, earn the right to continue, and then program in breaks roughly every 20 minutes after that. And tell me a story. Because, you know, the attention span, particularly here in Silicon Valley, is very short. People are absolutely overwhelmed with information. I have a friend at Google who gets 800 meeting requests a week. Stop and think about that. 800 meeting requests a week. And people are not going to remember the facts. They're not going to remember that a particular machine was able to produce 9,272 packages every hour. What they're going to remember is, yeah, there were these guys from Italy and they had this machine and it was like way better than somebody else. It was a lot faster. They're not going to remember the specifics of it was 12.298% faster. You need them to remember the big picture so that they want to talk to you more, so that you can help them make the decision that your product or service is the best choice for them. They start and they go on, they don't pay attention to the first 30 seconds, they don't pay attention to the first 4 minutes. It's just like, I'm here, I have your attention, let's go. They take too long. They'll be talking for 4 or 5 minutes, and they still haven't gotten to the point. And the person will be thinking, whether they say it out loud, they're going to be thinking, when are they going to tell me something I care about? And that I would say with the Italians is, I mean, the single most problematic thing I see, because I can tell, and this isn't just the work we've done with Arthur, this is work we do all over Italy. You know, I'll say, okay, you've got 4 minutes to pitch, and 9 minutes later, they're done. And it's like, what part of 4 minutes confused you? Well, but imagine that you had the privilege, you had the opportunity. It's the day before the big launch of the iPhone. And Steve's your good friend, and you go and have a cup of coffee with Steve, and you say, okay, Steve, you got to tell me what's going on. Steve would have explained what was going on in the exact same way that he presented to that audience. He would be like, you know, Chris, you know, wow, you know, we've been really lucky at Apple to be able to produce these kinds of things. And, you know, tomorrow we're launching 3 things, right? We're launching, you know, a new widescreen, you know, iPod with touch controls. We're going to create a new phone and an internet communication device. That the way he spoke, he could have been sitting across the table in a restaurant explaining to you, not in front of an audience of thousands of people. And that's what we're talking about. And what we encourage people to do is imagine you're just having a cup of coffee with a friend. How are you going to talk? I mean, you know, it's the kind of thing of, if you imagine you're on an airplane and somebody says, you know, so Valeria, you work for Arthur. Tell me about Arthur. What's that all about? You're not going to say, well, just a moment, let me go get my laptop so I can show you a bunch of slides. At least I hope you're not going to do that, right? You're just going to start talking with them. It doesn't matter if it's one person or 5,000 people. It's the same tone, it's the same way of speaking, it's the same intonation. It's storytelling. If you think about the video where Steve talked about the laser writer, right? He's like, and you saw it come out, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, we can sell this. He wasn't talking about, and I took the piece of paper out of the printer and I looked at the quality and it was like, oh, 300 dots per inch. That's pretty, no, right? That's the voice we defined because it's what makes you memorable. And I don't mean memorable in the sense of like, oh, wow, that was like the best presentation I ever saw in my life. It's memorable in the sense of 5 days from now, you remember it. There's a whole set of tools around what we call the customer centricity toolbox. It's things like customer development, it's customer journey mapping, it's building personas, it's doing segmentation. This is the point of being customer centric. If you don't deeply know your customer, you cannot tailor your messaging to the customer. It's why at the very beginning of this talk, I asked people, you know, who are you and what do you want out of this presentation, so that I could customize what it is I'm trying to do based on who you are. And you'll notice I skipped over a whole bunch of slides, right? Because they weren't relevant to the conversation that we're having. And you notice I just said conversation we're having, not the presentation I'm making. Some of it is you just need to practice. And I practice all the time on friends, right? I will have them go to a coffee shop or whatever, and I'll give my pitch. If I'm giving a real presentation, I'll give my presentation to friends, family, whomever will listen to me probably 20 or 30 times before I deliver it live. So that it's just, I don't need a script. I don't need the slides. I'm comfortable enough with it, and I've practiced enough talking to people I know. So the second piece is around getting comfortable in front of an audience. And that's also one of the things where you just have to do it enough. There are a couple of fun things that you can do. There's actually a great TED Talk. I'm looking it up right now. Okay, so there is a woman, Ann Cuddy, who talks about the importance of body language. I'm going to put it in the chat window here to everyone. Here's the link. She talks about doing the Superman pose. And if you know Superman, he stands there with his hands on his hips and his shoulder back and all of this. And there's actually neuroscience research that says if you do that, it changes the chemicals that your brain produces and makes you more confident, right? There's a bunch of these kinds of things that you can do. There's another tool to calm yourself down that's called box breathing. You can Google box breathing, but at the end, it comes down to practice. You just have to do it and do it and do it. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, talked about that to become truly world-class at something, you need to spend 10,000 hours doing it. That's 2 years of your life. And, you know, I think at this point, I'm a pretty good presenter of content such as this. I'm pretty good at running these kinds of sessions. I go back 8-9 years ago, man, I was bad. You know, I had great content. I just wasn't comfortable presenting the content. But I've probably now run 3,000, 4,000 workshops. And now it's just sort of like, sure, you know, you could, you know, Sarah could say, hey, Chris, I remember you have this workshop on developing a growth mindset. I could say, sure, and I could just start right now. But that's a function of doing it again and again and again. So again, you sort of have to think about what is the objective, right? So if I am doing just like, I'm going to get up and give a speech in front of an audience, I typically have almost nothing on my slides. I'll have an image and maybe 5 words, and that's about it. When I'm teaching a class or doing a workshop like this, I typically will have more on the slides because I'm going to give you the slides. And then you need to be able to look at the slides and have enough words to remember, oh yeah, I remember what Chris was talking about, right? If it's just a presentation to send someone who has never heard me present it, it will have more words on the slides. So again, it's about knowing your audience and what is my objective in the audience. What am I trying to get them to? What am I trying to get them to remember? Right. So it's on a continuum, but I'll share with you one of the other things you got to be careful about. Okay, let's go back. Quick screen share. I'm not even going to go into. Here we go. you got to pick like the visuals really carefully. So I'm going to make this bigger. This chart here with all the crazy lines was actually from a presentation that I saw. And the person was like, if you follow the purple line, you know, nobody can follow it. And even if you use pictures like this, where the guy is in front of like this, you know, minority report screen, people will actually start to look and try to figure out what are the equations. And if they're trying to decipher what the picture is, what are they doing? They're not listening to you. Even this picture, right, is sort of on the borderline, because people will ask, what's the girl doing in the cart? Why is she there, right? And I didn't do this today, but many times I will, when I show that picture, I'll actually mention that that's my daughter being bored. And the reason why I say that's my daughter being bored is because it stops you from wondering what the picture is, right? You got to be really careful that people don't get distracted by the visuals. You want the visuals to be able to be, you know, really instantly, you know, you want them to be instantly memorable, right? So if I go, let's go to, I share again, right? You know, a picture of the family with reading a book to the kids, storytelling, right? He's telling a story. And then it's like, okay, he's talking about storytelling. Oh, look, picture somebody telling story. You know, you come back to what it is that I'm saying. You're not distracted by the picture. You got to be really careful that the picture supports the story that you're telling. It doesn't distract the user, the listener, from the story that you're telling. It's both. I mean, it's very helpful to be able to give presentations in front of people who know how to coach presentations, because sometimes you will do things that you don't realize that you're doing. One of the most painful things on the planet to do is to video yourself while giving a presentation, and then going back and looking at yourself and being like, oh no, did I actually do that? I had the benefit in my last company. I was actually one of only 4 people in the company that was allowed to talk to the press. And they put me through a whole sort of like media training, all of that kind of stuff. But, you know, you just gotta, a lot of it is just practice, practice, practice. The scariest experience I ever had, even though I was already a very good presenter, was I was supposed to present at a Microsoft conference that had about 40,000 people there, really big conference. And I was all psyched up. I'm going to go give my talk. And the managers of the conference, I'm literally backstage ready to give my talk. And they come to me and say, Chris, your talk is pushed back by 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, why? Because I'm like, I'm ready to go. And they said, because Steve Ballmer wants to talk right now. Okay. Steve, CEO of Microsoft conference, I guess, you know, yeah, I guess Steve can talk. The problem for me was that Steve is such an amazing, dynamic presenter. Bounding all over the stage. And I mean, one time I was, you know, and he was like singing songs from the musical Pippin and everything. And I'm like, how on earth do I go out on stage after that? And so I found myself backstage doing the Superman pose, getting ready to go. There's always another level you can take yourself to.
Thank you very
Very
much.
Chris.
Thank you all.
Take care, Chris.
Have a nice
Talk to
day.
you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.